Okay, good morning. So I went live. Nobody showed up. So it's 10:45 in the morning. I figured I'd do a video lesson. Um, Maybe 10 something in the morning is too early for you folks. That's cool. If you could leave a comment after this video, if you have a better time to meet, I'd be more than willing to be flexible and change the meeting time around. I really think it's important that we get together as a class at least once a week and just kind of talk about the assignment, the expectations, and I think you'll get a lot more out of it. So please comment on this video another time that might be better for all of us to get together, and then we'll make it happen. All right, so the lesson today, we're going to continue on our unit on the Cold War. If you remember, the Cold War was all about America's fear of communism, their fear of the Soviet Union taking over, their region and then eventually the world. And it was all about us trying to contain communism and keep communism from spreading. So that's what you're going to look at today. And you're going to do this in a couple of different ways. Part one is you are going to um, do a quick writing prompt. You're going to click on this video link here. The video is 1 minute and 7 seconds, so it's very short. And it's going to explain something we haven't heard yet before, this idea of domino theory. Okay. Having fun with my tools today. And domino theory, what you would see in this video is the idea that started with Dwight D. Eisenhower, who's the president in the early 50s in the United States during the early part of the Cold War. He believed that once one country fell to communism, all the countries around it would fall to communism, kind of like dominoes. If you've ever seen those cool domino tricks that people do. There's videos on YouTube and stuff where you knock one domino over, another one knocks over, another one knocks over. That's the idea. Okay. And they were specifically worried about in Asia, Southeast Asia. Okay. Korea happens to be in Southeast Asia. We learned about this last week, but we went to war in Korea to curb communism from spreading, right? You had South Vietnam, South Korea, which was trying to uphold a democratic government, uh, fighting against North Korea, which was communist, and they wanted to spread communism to the rest of the country. So that's what the domino theory is about. How did it relate to the fears Americans had during the Cold War? Well, they were afraid of communism spreading. So the way it relates is it's exactly what they thought was going to happen. They thought it was going to spread. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is a reading. Okay, and I really want you guys to pay attention to the maps here as well. First map, even before you read, is just kind of gives you an idea of where in the world we're talking about here. So if you see this little inset here, okay, this is the world. We're over here. This is Southeast Asia. You got China over here. I'll do a little dot here. You got the Soviet Union kind of over here. So, of course, they're worried that, hey, if Vietnam becomes communist, well, then you've got countries like Cambodia and Laos that are going to become communist, Thailand, and then eventually all the way over to India. And that's what America was worried about. And that's why we ended up going to war in Vietnam, something that Americans later on would be very unhappy about and would protest quite a bit. We're not going to get too into it. You'll learn a lot more about that next year in your U.S. history class. All right, so I guess I'll just read. It's a very short, quick reading. I'd like you to read along with me, annotate as needed, pause as needed. And this is all about how America got involved in the Vietnam War, as well as uh, why what it has to do with the Cold War. as well, is what we'll be looking at. Okay, so first paragraph. The Vietnam War was a long and expensive war between the communist regime of North Vietnam and the Viet Cong communist led guerrillas, supported by Communist China and the Soviet Union, uh, and the anti communist South Vietnam and its ally, the United States. The communist regime in the North wanted to unify Vietnam in a single state that would be based on a communist ideology. In 1958, the Viet Cong began to battle the South Vietnamese government. Okay, so in the North, you have these guys called the Viet Cong. They were what was known as guerrilla fighters, and a guerrilla fighter, if you aren't familiar with that term, is they were people that used the lay of the land to hide and fight. So Vietnam has quite a bit of jungle, and they use this jungle to be a really tough enemy to fight. The American soldiers had a really tough time fighting them. Anyway, the Viet Cong, they're in the north, they're communist, and they are backed by both China, which is communist, and Soviet Union, which we know is communist. Remember, Soviet Union, they want to spread communism. The United States, who backed South Vietnam, they want to keep communism from spreading. So those are the people that were involved in the fighting. All right, next paragraph. Motivated by a policy of containment, and of course we remember what containment is. It's a Cold War policy of the U.S. to contain the spread of communism. The United States pledged support for the anti-communist South Vietnam. The U.S. was also concerned about the domino theory in Southeast Asia. And of course, we just learned what that is. They feared that if Vietnam became a communist state, then so would Laos, Cambodia, and other nations in the area. Beginning in the early 1960s, with President Kennedy, the United States and its allies provided South Vietnam training and equipment from the American military. By 1968, the U.S. had nearly 500,000 troops in Vietnam. Oh, and I meant to point this out, but this image here, we don't want to gloss over the images. They're really important. This is a Viet Cong. This was a guy from North Vietnam who wanted to spread communism, who was supporting the communist government, and he was captured, and they purposely made him sit this way with his hands tied behind his back and blindfolded. And it was, a form of interrogation, I guess we'll call it. Some may say torture. Okay. And as you can see, we didn't, go right straight to war. We started with, in the early 60s, just providing some military expertise. So we'd sent over some of our higher ups that would tell the South Vietnamese, hey, this is how you want to fight your enemy. And we sent them weapons. And then eventually it got to the point where by the late 60s, we were in full-blown war. We had 500,000 of our young troops there. Later in the war, the United States launched airstrikes against the enemy. Ho Chi Minh Trail, named after the North Vietnamese leader, was a supply line used by the North through Laos and Cambodia. This allowed the North to attack at strategic locations in South Vietnam. President Nixon ordered the invasion of Cambodia for the purpose of disrupting North Vietnamese supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This included 30 separate operations and airstrikes between May and June of 1970. Okay, so I just want to point out this map here, which is also very important. It shows what we were just talking about in the reading. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. Oh, there we go. Zoom. Okay. I just want to make sure you can see this map really well because it's important. Okay, so you can see right here in yellow, this is South Vietnam. In red, this is North Vietnam. And these little black lines here, that's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So what the North Vietnamese would do is they would take this trail through Laos and Cambodia and sneak into South Vietnam. and they would launch attacks that way. It made it very difficult for the United States and South Vietnam to combat the North. They had underground tunnels, all sorts of different networks. They had a lot of towns in Laos and Cambodia, and even in South Vietnam that were sympathetic to the North Vietnamese and would let them, you know, stay in their town for the day or whatever on their journey down south. So very difficult enemy for sure to combat. All right. So moving on from 1968 to 1973, efforts were made to end the conflict through diplomacy or dialogue. So talking, they wanted to, talk it out. By January 1973, an agreement was reached and the United States forces were withdrawn from Vietnam and the United States prisoners of war were released. Similar to the situation in Korea, the country of Vietnam was split close to a line of latitude, in this case, the 17th parallel. Communist North Vietnam was above the line, and Democratic South Vietnam was below the line. In 1975, South Vietnam surrendered to the North. Vietnam was unified as a communist state called Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and it's actually still communist to this day. So you can see here where it says DMZ. Again, you might want to zoom in to be able to see it better. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's the 17th parallel. That's where it was divided. North Vietnam communist, South Vietnam non-communist until, of course, 1975 when South Vietnam fell to the North. Similar to what happened with the Korean War, rather than it being split at the 17th parallel in Korea, it's split at the 38th parallel. All right, I'll continue on. It says the Vietnam War had disastrous effects. Vietnam's infrastructure was destroyed and farmland was polluted by American chemical warfare, Agent Orange. An estimated 2 million Vietnamese died and another 3 million were wounded. About 12 million became refugees who fled to neighboring countries. During the Vietnam War, 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam, and the war cost the United States millions of dollars. The United States' entrance into the war led to protests by students and others at home in the United States. Despite all the money and troops the United States sacrificed, it failed to contain communism. So, the United States will never admit defeat, but really, we did not win this war for sure. And we didn't accomplish our goal of containing communism, the spread of communism. Eventually, as you read, or I read, and you followed along, South Vietnam fell to the north, and all of Vietnam unified and became communist. Okay, so after the reading, you have 5 questions to answer. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these right now with you. You can do that on your own. But we went through the side the United States supported, that of course was the South, and we went through the side the Soviet Union supported, that was the North. We talked about containment and how that was important in what was going on in Vietnam. Remember, they wanted to contain communism, keep it from spreading, that whole idea of the domino theory. The Ho Chi Minh Trail and Viet Cong, remember, that was all about North Vietnam. The Viet Cong were the fighters in the North that supported communism, and we learned about the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And then, of course, we talked about some similarities between the Korean War and the Vietnam War, which is what your third and final task is going to be about. And then finally, in your own words, how did the war end and who won? And it's obvious that the United States did not win, but who won? All right, part 3, very quickly, and then I will be done, is you are going to do a Venn diagram. It's not circular. Sorry, I used a table instead. But you're going to compare and contrast the Korean War and the Vietnam War. They have some similarities and they have some differences. And the way you're going to do that is you have these descriptions here. You're going to drag and drop them into the correct spot. I will give you a hint. 3 of them go into the both section. So that would be what both the Korean War and the Vietnam War have that are similar. And 2 go in Korean War, 2 go in the Vietnam War. Let's do just one together so you can get an idea. So let's find one that both that are similar between both the Vietnam War and the Korean War. And if you look here, it says US was involved to stop the spread of communism. I would say that is definitely both Vietnam War and Korean War. So I would drag that in a better way, drag that there. And that's how you do it. I am available through email or through Google Classroom if you need to message me and you have any questions. Um, one other thing I want to point out before I go. Tomorrow, Wednesday, is your wellness day, which means there is no formal class that's going to meet. Um, However, I think that you will have plenty of time to work on any assignments that maybe you're missing. So I did want to offer extra help. So if you click here, it'll be posted. This is an old posting, but it'll be posted later on today. If you click here, you can sign up for a 30-minute slot to work with me one-on-one if you need the help or if you would like to. It's completely optional, but some of you have fallen behind and I think you could use the help. So use that.